Today I'm going to talk about Elden Ring. Now, I like Elden Ring quite a bit. It's one of the best games that came out of this year easily, but I do have some criticisms. I think my main two criticisms with the game are that bosses' movesets are done in a way where they both have large hitboxes and are very attack heavy, meaning that they attack a lot within a very short amount of time, meaning that fighting them fair and square is going to be very difficult unless you take a lot of time to learn the moveset. I think this is a problem because it means that players will then, instead of learning this, will go on to exploit the game. And which leads into my number two problem with Elden Ring, is that the game is very easy to exploit. For example, obvious one being that magic does a lot of damage and is very easy to buff. For example, if you just have two staffs out, you do more damage than you would with one. And what I mean by this is what you want to do is have one staff that has a high incantation rate, which is this stat right here, which means that the more this goes up, the more damage you're going to be doing overall. And the second thing you want to do is have, say, the gravity staff in the left hand, and that scales up the damage. This can be scaled up even further by getting the teardrop that allows you to either have infinite FP for a short amount of time, or you could also just get the one that increases the amount of damage that you do. And this makes it so that you're doing a boatload of damage for no real risk or reward. It's just you're going to be melting bosses very easily. And of course, this can be further upscaled with armor sets, and you can also do things like buffs. Let's say you put on Golden Vow, Commander's Standard, and you have, let's say, the talisman that increases your magic incantation damage. You will then be doing even more damage, which will pretty much melt bosses. And with things like strength builds, for example, all you really need is to have a weapon, let's say the anchor, with the spear talisman, the one that increases charge attack damage, have the commander's standard, golden vow on a dagger, or you could just make your faith up to 25, and then instead of doing 12% more damage, you could then have a 15% increase of damage with the actual spell of golden vow. This of course can be even further increased when you put on the red feathered branch sword talisman, which raises your attack power by 20% when your health is below 20%. And then you proc Knight's Resolve, and you are melting bosses. And so I think the problem with this whole exploit system is that, one, it means that they're going to be increasing bosses' health pools even further, which of course can be got around by doing even more buffs. And so it's a race to then nerf items instead of removing certain things like buffs and just keeping the damage pool at a reasonable level, because at that point you're not even thinking about the people who just want to run like a short sword or some of the less optimal builds. You're then competing with people who are breaking the game, and so you're making these bosses' health pools far larger, and you've now left the people who aren't playing optimally in the dust, and so they have to learn the boss's moveset and actually play the game, instead of just exploiting the game and killing bosses in 1 or 2 hits. And I don't like that mindset. Now, to be fair, it's very fun to figure out all this stuff and do all the math in order to get these buffs, because, by the way, all those buffs are multiplicative, not addition, so you can really get high numbers just by doing these. But anyway, yeah. So I think the issue is that this leaves people who don't want to do all these maths out of the game, whereas you play something like Dark Souls 1 and these kind of things are still kind of in the game, but they're not nearly as prevalent, and you didn't have a lot of buffing spells that made the developers have to increase the health pools so high. And yeah, so I think that's my issue, is that you're not really, if you're playing the game at the highest level possible, you aren't learning these enemies' move sets too much. You're just increasing your damage to where you're one-shotting everybody. And this is of course also PvP and PvE have different attack values, and also just some combinations are just plain broken. Like for example, if you manage to get a hit on some of the larger damage weapons, like say the anchor with your spear talisman and your axe talisman, that increases your charge hit by 15%. And also if you're using the flask, that increases charge attack damage. You are still doing numbers that are really high, and this is probably one of the worser examples because there are other more valuable weapons like the Moonveil Katana that would also increase damage based on if you're doing pokes. So you could have the spear talisman on, and you could also just be increasing your general intelligence stat and your dex to just make yourself do a lot of damage without being too high level. And so the game kind of breaks down the moment you have all these buffs, because instead of focusing on whether the person is using their specific attack animations well, you're doing large AoE attacks or tracking attacks that catch people off guard and either stun them or kill them outright. And it just leads to a less balanced, less fun PvP experience, and that's not even including all the things like not being able to do fight clubs or arenas, and is just generally less enjoyable because you know that there are very specific builds that are not even very specific builds. There are a lot of builds now that are just very broken and will kill you very quickly. And it means that you're not going to be doing PvP that much because you're just going to be killed so fast. Particularly if you are an invader, you have less healing and you're always going to be fighting minimum 2 people. So it just makes it very not fun. And it just felt like this wasn't necessary. It just felt like you created a problem and now you're trying to solve said problem by making it worse for people who don't necessarily want to be doing all that math. And so yeah, I just think, at least for me personally, I don't think Elden Ring is quite as good as Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3. And I even forgot to mention things like removing a lot of covenants that spiced up the invasions, like having fake invaders with the purple ones, or having different types of ally invaders or companions, and just all sorts of minor faction things that were just completely removed instead of being put into the game. And it really damages the overall online element of the game. They also didn't include like an arena like in Dark Souls 2, and honestly, although I'm not a big fan of Dark Souls 2, you can take the few good things in that game, like the arena or the covenant systems in that game. That'd be okay, that'd be fun. It has issues. Elden Ring has issues that I personally don't like as much as the other games, but it's still a fun game, and it's still a really beautiful game and really well made. I just wish that some of these issues didn't exist in the game. And so, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day.